All right, moving on to something else, which I just came across today, which I thought was very, very interesting. We've got a lot of what we see today in Hollywood and in the kind of film industry is you get the film that comes out in cinemas, and then you get the director's cut at some later point. And this isn't new, essentially. I mean, we've had this with like Blade Runner. We've had this with Lord of the Rings, which I actually think, because I'm such a massive fan of Lord of the Rings, I appreciate those new scenes because it makes me feel like I'm watching it kind of newly in some ways for the first time. But I mean, you don't need those extra scenes to enhance the Lord of the Rings films. They are great on their own. And we've seen this kind of thing play out with a lot of superhero films. Particularly, we had Zack Snyder, who the is has become the buzzword of controversy. I've loved a lot of Zack Snyder's films. I loved Batman v Superman. I liked his Justice League 4 hour edit. I loved Man of Steel as well. I thought it was a really well done film. He's a visionary storyteller. He's got an amazing way of capturing amazing things. But during the whole DCEU chaos, there was the Batman v Superman film that came out, which was divisive to say the least. It didn't make as much as anyone thought that it should, with two DC headliners of Superman and Batman being in the film. It didn't really satisfy critics across the board. It was kind of just a divisive film. And the cut came out, the director's cut came out, which I think was a real improvement. I loved, like I said, I loved Batman v Superman. I really loved it. I was an advocate for it. I was defending it, and I thought that the cut that came out after actually really fleshed out a lot of the story and really helped us navigate that story a bit better. And look, Zack Snyder was on Joe Rogan, and he had a few thoughts to say on his time and his history with the Batman film. And so one of the things he speaks about in the podcast is why he allowed Batman to kill. There are iterations in the comics where Batman does kill. It's not unheard of, and I'm not necessarily against it. I think that the vast majority of Batman stories means that he doesn't kill, but in Zack Snyder's version, he decided to take he had a take on the character which did kill, and the reasons he gives for that is to say, well, we kind of view Batman and these characters as gods, and well, let's expose them and expose their flaws, and see, and or put them in a position where they have to decide between the good of saving someone while killing someone, or having to look at the alternative of allowing innocents die. And he gives the example of the movie where the guy's holding Martha and he's going to kill her, and he says, I'll do it, I'll really do it. And then Batman's like, yeah, I believe you, and then decides to just kill the dude. And again, if that's the take you're going for Batman, then definitely, like, that's fine. Because he's saying, well, I get that Batman's character in the comic books doesn't kill, but in certain situations, when forced to do something for the greater good, you know, I can see that being justified. I get that motivation, and I agree with it. If that's the case that you want to take, and this is an older Batman, the reason why it worked in The Dark Knight Returns is because it was an older, gruffer, at the end of his rope Batman who was kind of coming out of years of, doing this and out of like a retirement, and then just kind of closing off these loops and tying off loose ends, and that's why he kills the Joker. That's why he ends up wrecking shop with a lot of people. Maybe not necessarily the right way to introduce a new Batman to an audience that um, you know, in the comics is at the end of his run, where in the movies we're kind of starting at the bottom of the chain. Like this is the new Batman we're gonna be following. I loved his take on. I love Ben Affleck's take on Batman. I loved Batman v Superman. But if the justification you're giving for that is to say, in certain scenarios, he has to do that, fine, does not explain why he has a machine gun that mows down cars while the guys are clearly in there. Does not justify why he's branding people that he knows will get murdered in jail. That doesn't connect for me, because it's like you're not sticking to what you're saying. If you're saying that he's placed in certain scenarios where he's only doing it because he has to. Not all the deaths that happen in Batman v Superman are because he had to. He could have found a lot of ways to navigate those situations without murdering people. And that's just the one aspect I kind of disagreed with his take on that. And he's defending it when I get that. But the way he's going about it, I don't necessarily agree with. That being said, listening to him talk about it and seeing the passion he still has for these characters, I really love that. I love to see that people still care so much about these characters. He is obviously a major fan. And again, I would watch Batman v Superman again. I love the story. I love the films. So I have no problem with that. I just thought that his motivation for that didn't make sense to me. If that was his motivation for saying he's killing. If you're saying Batman is just a gruff at the end of his line, doesn't give two hoots about who he kills, well, no problem. Then he can murder across the board. But if you're saying it's only because of isolated situations, that I think is wrong in terms of what he filmed. Because ultimately, the core of the Batman character is that he doesn't kill, because the reason why that's a great part of who he is, it adds so much complexity to how he manages people. The whole reason why Arkham Asylum exists is because he's not popping off these rogues gallery villains that he has every 5 seconds. Because if Batman did kill, he would have killed the Joker a long time ago. There's no real battle there. Batman would have no problem taking out every single one of his villains. There might be an issue there with like maybe Bane and Killer Croc, but he'd probably just get explosives and blow them up. Like, you would not have a rogues gallery if it wasn't for the fact that Batman had to hold to the ethics that he does, his moral code. So by breaking that, I get if there's a unique scenario where he's just like, I'm only killing because I know I have to. I have to save this child's life. I have to save billions of people. I have to save this Superman's mum. But if you're saying to me that, that's across the board, probably not the best way to introduce our new Batman in that world. And we can kind of look back retrospectively and disagree with what he's done. It's hard to create something in the first place, and props to him for doing such an amazing job of making what he did. But I think that a crucial part of Batman's character is that he doesn't kill, because if he does kill, it ends the stories real quick. It's a good Elseworld story. It's a good one-off graphic novel. It's a good independent Elseworld solo film. But if you're wanting continuity moving forward, he can't be killing people, because then he just kills all of his villains and he moves on with life, and then Gotham is saved and great, and we can just not have anything to watch. It's a lot more compelling when you deal with psychology of someone who is potentially crazy himself. Batman is a bit of a psychopath. He's dressing up as a bat to intimidate people on the streets in the middle of the night. Like, he has no social life. He has no family. He's like a bit of a crazy dude. He is, and some people argue this, should be in the asylum with all of the people he's putting there. So to remove that element of like, what would a logical person do? He would kill. Okay, well then we don't really have Batman. That's just my take. I know that a lot of people would disagree with me on that, but I just think that way he's kind of framed that and talked about that kind of doesn't justify what he did in that film for me. If his justification was to say, Batman kills in this film because he's just at the end of his rope and couldn't be bothered because of the way the world's going and his fear around Superman, yeah. But if you're still trying to say, I've kept to the comics, I've done justice with the comics, and I've done justice in this film, it's not the same. Do you agree with, first of all, Zack Snyder's take on how he presented the Batman in Batman v Superman? Do you think that his justification makes sense across the board? I get the individual one-off experience, but to kind of explain his actions across the film, do you agree with that? Or do you think that, it's fair enough and he did what he did and it's a great film and stands on its own and there's no issues? Let me know in the comments below.